Nobody paid attention to the quiet janitor mopping the floors every night. He was invisible to most, just another worker in the background. But one evening, in a high-stakes meeting where top executives were panicking over a $100 million system failure, he did something that left the entire company speechless. He solved the problem in seconds. What the CEO did next, no one saw it coming. The office building gleamed under the city lights, its glass walls shining like a jewel in the night. Inside, people hurried back and forth in expensive suits, clutching coffee cups and phones, talking numbers, deadlines, and bottom lines. But down the hall, away from the buzz and importance, a man pushed a cleaning cart with a quiet rhythm. Jerome worked the night shift. Every evening, when the last of the daytime employees left and the silence crept in, he began his slow, steady walk through the vast, glossy corridors of the tech giant's headquarters. Most people barely noticed him, just the janitor. No one really asked his name or wondered about his life. He was just the man with the mop, always there, always silent, always cleaning. But Jerome noticed everything. He noticed how the lights on the server room panel flickered inconsistently. He noticed when someone from it muttered about a recurring bug in the system. He noticed when a lead engineer left a whiteboard covered in frantic scribbles late at night, trying to map out a solution to a problem that didn't make sense. What they didn't know was that Jerome understood all of it. Every diagram, every bit of jargon. He had studied it before, long ago, before his life had taken a turn he never expected. Years earlier, Jerome had been a promising electrical engineering student at a community college. He had dreams of designing systems, solving complex problems, building new things. But then his father died suddenly, and with his mother falling sick, Jerome had to drop out and work. Bills didn't care about dreams. A friend helped him get a janitor job, and it paid steadily, so he stuck with it. He never complained, but he never stopped learning either. He spent his nights reading old textbooks he got from secondhand stores, watching online lectures on engineering and systems theory, and fixing broken appliances from neighbors. He didn't need recognition, he just needed to stay sharp. And now, 12 years later, here he was, still invisible, still cleaning. That Monday evening something felt different. The tension in the building was heavier than usual. The IT department looked more frantic than ever. One of the senior engineers had actually yelled, something Jerome had never heard in this place before. A message had gone out company-wide earlier that day. System malfunction detected. All departments are on alert. Non-essential access restricted. But no one had spoken to Jerome about it. No one ever thought to, so he kept sweeping the floors, emptying trash bins, and quietly observing the chaos around him. As the night wore on, Jerome paused outside the executive boardroom. Through the slightly ajar door, he could hear a heated argument. "This is a full-blown disaster." Someone shouted, "We're bleeding millions every hour. I told you we needed to upgrade the legacy framework last year, but it's too late for that now. Even the consultants can't find the root of the issue. This thing's buried too deep." Jerome leaned slightly closer. He didn't want to intrude, but the word sent his mind spinning. Legacy framework, system failure, patterns. Something clicked, something familiar. He had seen something like this before, an article about a corrupted loop embedded in backup systems. A rare error, but devastating if overlooked. It had the exact symptoms they were describing. He froze. Should he say something? He glanced down at his mop. Who would listen to him? He was just the janitor, not a tech, not a consultant, just Jerome. But his heart pounded louder than his doubts. He took a deep breath. If he was wrong, he'd get laughed at, maybe even fired. But if he was right, ... He gently knocked on the boardroom door, heads turned. The CEO, a tall, sharp-eyed man with a reputation for being ruthless, stared at him with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Can I help you?" he asked, clearly not in the mood for interruptions. Jerome stepped inside, voice calm but firm. "I think I know what's wrong with your system," he said. There was a pause, a long, thick silence. And just like that, everything began to change. For a moment, nobody said a word. The room fell into an eerie silence as Jerome stood just inside the doorway, his hand still gloved, gripping the handle of his mop. Around the massive glass table sat some of the sharpest minds in the company: engineers, directors, tech leads, even the CEO himself. Their faces were a mixture of exhaustion, confusion, and disbelief. A janitor, claiming he knew what was wrong, with a $100 million system failure. It was almost laughable, except Jerome didn't look like he was joking. His eyes were steady, calm, focused. The CEO raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me," he asked slowly. His tone wasn't angry yet, just irritated, curious, maybe, mostly annoyed. Jerome cleared his throat. "I was outside cleaning, and I heard what you were saying about the legacy system, the override loop. The backup's not syncing right. I think you're dealing with a ghost command loop, old, that's still running in the background and corrupting your data flow. It's rare, but I've read about it before. If I'm right, it's not hardware. It's buried code from a past update that never got fully retired." There was a beat of silence. Then a chuckle came from a senior engineer at the table. "You read about it," he said, almost mockingly. "Where?" "On a blog." Jerome didn't flinch. In a systems architecture manual I found at a used bookstore, he said plainly, and some online forums. I also ran into it once helping a friend fix an old PA system. The symptoms are almost the same. Another executive sighed. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. Why is he even in here? But something in the CEO's expression had shifted. He leaned back in his chair, staring hard at Jerome, not with scorn, but interest. He didn't get to the top by ignoring unusual ideas, and frankly, after 48 hours of non-stop work, failure, and bleeding money, he was desperate enough to listen to anything that wasn't another buzzword-filled guess from someone in a suit. What would you do? He asked finally. Jerome stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if waiting to be thrown out at any second. First, I'd isolate the backup node and shut down the legacy permissions. Then I'd run a trace on the recursive commands from the 2014 update. You're probably still using an old shell protocol somewhere in your data path. It's hijacking control every time the main system tries to reset. Everyone stared at him. That kind of knowledge wasn't something you just pick up by chance. One of the younger engineers, clearly intrigued, started typing rapidly on her laptop. A minute passed. Then two, her eyes widened. He's right, she whispered. There is an old shell protocol still running in the diagnostic layer. It shouldn't even be there. Another engineer leaned over her screen, then looked up at the CEO. It's been ghost-triggering loopbacks for almost 2 days. That's what's been scrambling everything. The CEO slowly stood. He didn't speak. He walked over to Jerome and looked him in the eye. Can you fix it? Jerome hesitated. If you give me access and a clean terminal, yeah, I think I can. Then do it. Some of the executives protested, but the CEO cut them off. None of you have fixed it. Let's see if the janitor can. Jerome was escorted to a small side room with a secure terminal. The system was sluggish but still alive. With quiet confidence he typed quickly, navigating the command lines, like a veteran coder. He found the corrupted loop buried under layers of forgotten code. A few command strokes later, he shut it down and recompiled the path logic. The screen flickered, then stabilized. All across the building, systems began to return to normal. Files restored, processes resumed. The bleeding stopped. Back in the boardroom, an alert pinged on every screen. System stabilized, operating at 100%. For the first time in 2 days, the room fell into stunned relief. Engineers slumped back in their chairs. One of them muttered, "He actually did it." The CEO walked into the room where Jerome sat, hands resting in his lap, calm as ever. "You just saved us from a complete disaster," the CEO said quietly. "I want to know who you are." "Everything." Jerome looked up, his voice humble but, "Sure, I'm just someone who pays attention." But it was clear to everyone in that room Jerome was far more than that, and nothing in this company would be the same again. The next morning, the sun rose over the city like nothing had happened. Outside the company's headquarters, the streets bustled, emails flew through cyberspace, and the world continued its usual rhythm. But inside the building, things were different. The energy had shifted. Word of what had happened the night before spread like wildfire through every floor, every department, every inbox. People whispered about it near coffee machines, stared wide-eyed at internal chat threads, and checked the news for confirmation. The janitor fixed the crisis, they said. He walked in, said 3 sentences, and solved what a dozen engineers couldn't. It sounded like a rumor, like something made up, but it wasn't. Jerome, the same man who had cleaned the offices for over a decade without anyone ever asking his last name, had done the impossible. Jerome arrived at work at his usual time, wearing his usual uniform. He didn't expect anything to be different. He figured he'd do his shift, mop the lobby, wipe the glass doors, maybe be asked a few questions, and then go home. But when he stepped into the building, security didn't wave him through like usual. Instead, they stopped him pleasantly and told him to wait. Confused, he stood there holding his cart, unsure if he was in trouble or being thanked. A few minutes later, an assistant in a suit appeared and said the CEO wanted to see him upstairs right now. Jerome had never been beyond the 3rd floor. Now he was being escorted to the top level where the company's leaders worked behind locked doors and glass walls. People he'd only ever seen in passing turned to look at him. Some nodded with respect, others just stared. When he entered the executive suite, the CEO was already waiting, standing beside a long table with a view of the skyline behind him. He wasn't alone. There were several department heads in the room, along with 2 people Jerome didn't recognize. Everyone looked serious. The CEO smiled. "Jerome, glad you're here. Please sit." Jerome hesitated. "I'm on shift." "Not anymore," the CEO said, still smiling. "You're off cleaning duty indefinitely." Jerome sat slowly, unsure of what was happening. One of the unfamiliar people introduced herself as the head of talent acquisition. The other was from the tech innovation team. They had pulled Jerome's employee file and found almost nothing in it. No promotions, no complaints, no mentions of technical background, just years of steady, reliable janitorial work. But after last night, the CEO wanted answers, so Jerome told him not everything. He wasn't one to brag, but just enough. He explained how he'd gone to school for engineering, how he had to drop out, how he never stopped studying even though he worked nights. He explained how he learned from books, online forums, broken electronics at home, how he'd seen the signs of the system error because he still studied, still paid attention, and how he didn't say anything earlier because nobody ever asked. The room was silent again, but not like the night before. This silence was thoughtful, respectful. A few people glanced down, maybe ashamed they'd walked past this man 100 times without ever seeing him. Then the CEO leaned forward and said something that would change Jerome's life. We want to offer you a new position, a real one, official, head of systems diagnostics. It's yours, if you want it. Full salary, full authority to build a small team. I don't care what's on your resume. You proved your value when it mattered. Jerome was stunned. His hands, still calloused from years of cleaning, clenched slightly in disbelief. He had expected a thank you, maybe a bonus or a plaque. Not this. He looked up. You're serious, dead serious, the CEO replied. You've got something. We can't teach instinct, clarity, drive. You saw what no one else did. Jerome nodded slowly. I'll accept, but I want one condition. The room tensed. Go on, the CEO said. I want to start a program. Jerome said, to find others like me, people working here right now, janitors, cafeteria workers, clerks who might have skills no one's noticed yet. Give them a chance to show what they can do. The CEO paused. Then he smiled again, this time wider. Done, and just like that, the man no one noticed became the man everyone listened to. The janitor who saved the company had just opened a door not only for himself but for countless others who had been invisible for far too long. The company had never seen a week like this one. Jerome's story was still the main topic of conversation across departments, from the engineers who now looked at him with awe to the front desk receptionist who had once chatted with him during breaks and now told everyone proudly, I always knew there was something different about Jerome. Overnight, he had gone from an invisible presence to a symbol, not just of talent, but of how blind a company could be to the people right under its nose. What made it more powerful was Jerome's response. He didn't show up the next day in a fancy suit or with a new attitude. He wore the same worn-out shoes, carried himself the same way, and greeted everyone with the same calm nod. But now, when he walked into rooms, people stood up. Jerome didn't waste time in his new role. Within days he had an office, a company, email, and access to all internal systems. But more importantly, he was given full authority to launch the initiative he'd asked for. With the CEO's backing, he started what would soon be called the Hidden Talent Program. It was simple in concept. Any employee, regardless of job title, could submit a brief description of their skills or knowledge outside their current role coding. Design, data analysis, robotics, anything, and be considered for cross-departmental projects or mentorship programs. No degrees required, no fancy resumes, just ability. At first, people laughed at it, not publicly but quietly. Some executives whispered that it was a PR stunt, others said it wouldn't last. How many janitors really know code? One manager scoffed in a meeting, this is going to be a drain on resources. But Jerome didn't argue. He let the results speak. Within a week, over 200 submissions came in, not just from janitors, but from mailroom clerks, cafeteria cooks, night security staff, and even parking garage attendants. Some had once been teachers, engineers, or students who dropped out due to family struggles or lack of opportunity. One cafeteria worker submitted a sample app he had coded in his spare time. Another had built an AI chatbot in her bedroom, trained on customer service transcripts. One of the cleaning crew had a working prototype of a smart cleaning device he'd never had a chance to pitch. Jerome reviewed every submission personally. He didn't just look at their skills, he looked at their stories. He saw himself in so many of them. People who had once dreamed of something bigger, but life had told them no too many times. Now he was giving them a yes. One of the first people Jerome brought in was a quiet, middle-aged man named Ravi who worked night security. Ravi had once been a software architect in India, but immigration delays and medical bills had forced him into whatever job he could find in the US. Jerome gave him a chance to consult on a new internal security tool, and within 2 weeks, Ravi had helped reduce the company's cyber risk exposure by 15%. Then there was Marisol, a janitor who had never said a word to anyone. Turns out she was a whiz at UX design. Jerome gave her an internship on the app development team. Within a month, she redesigned the internal employee app interface so well that HR began using it as a model for external products. As these stories spread, the culture began to shift. People started talking across departments more. Engineers asked janitors for input. Managers scheduled meetings with staff they'd never noticed before. It wasn't just a tech miracle, it was a human one. And through it all, Jerome stayed steady. He still visited the cleaning crew every day, still helped when short-staffed, still ate lunch with the same people. He never forgot where he came from and made sure no one else did either. The CEO, once skeptical but now inspired, called a full company meeting at month's end, in front of thousands of employees. He pointed at Jerome and said, "This man reminded us that talent doesn't come dressed in titles. It comes dressed in humility, hard work, and patience. From now on, this company doesn't just builds people. The applause was thunderous. But Jerome just nodded quietly, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. He knew this wasn't about him anymore. This was bigger than any promotion or pay raise. This was about proving that brilliance can live in the shadows and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to turn on the light. 6 months after that night, a janitor walked into a boardroom and rewrote the fate of a billion-dollar company. Everything had changed. Jerome's face had appeared in business magazines, local news stations, and even a viral documentary titled The Janitor Who Saved the System. But if you asked him, none of that mattered. He still woke up at the same time every morning. He still took the bus to work. And sometimes, when no one was looking, he still picked up a mop, not because he had to, but because it reminded him of the silence he came from and the millions of unheard voices still out there. The Hidden Talent program was no longer a pilot. It had become a permanent division within the company, now modeled by other firms around the country. Dozens of employees had transitioned into new roles. Former cooks were now developers. Former warehouse workers were now product testers and designers. Internally, people began referring to the transformation as the Jerome Shift, a cultural awakening that realigned how people looked at one another and how companies defined value. But Jerome wasn't content with internal change. He wanted to take the movement beyond corporate walls. So he partnered with local community colleges and workforce training programs to create outreach scholarships for workers in low-income jobs who had untapped technical potential. He set up evening workshops at the company's headquarters where anyone, janitor or engineer, intern or executive, could come and learn side by side. No judgment, no hierarchy. At one of those evening sessions, a young single mother named Keisha caught his attention. She worked part-time in the company's cafeteria and attended Jerome's beginner coding class every Wednesday night after her shift. Quiet, focused, always the last to leave. One night after class, she shyly handed Jerome a USB drive and said, "It's nothing fancy, just something I made at home." It was a lightweight inventory management system for small businesses designed to run on outdated computers, built for shops that couldn't afford expensive software. Jerome spent all night reviewing the code. It was brilliant. He didn't wait. By morning, he had already set up a meeting between Keisha and the product innovation team. Within a month, her tool was being beta tested in small stores across the city under a new community tech initiative. The company launched another program Jerome helped design, but while the world praised him, Jerome stayed grounded. He often told people, "This isn't about me. I just opened a door. Everyone else walked through it." Still, there were challenges. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some longtime managers struggled with the idea that a janitor could become their colleague overnight. Some departments resisted the culture shift, claiming it was a distraction from real business. Jerome faced criticism in subtle ways: dismissive emails, unspoken resentment in meetings, backhanded compliments. But he never reacted with anger. He just kept showing results. Every time a skeptic saw one of his program's participants succeed, they got quieter. Every time someone got promoted who once cleaned bathrooms, the resistance lost another voice. One day, Jerome got a message from the CEO, asking him to stop by his office. When he arrived, he was surprised to see a room full of board members, waiting. The CEO stood and said, "We've been talking. You've started something we didn't know we needed, and now we want your help to take it further, nationwide, maybe even global." Jerome blinked. "You want me to run that?" "No," the CEO replied with a grin. "We want you to lead it. It would mean stepping away from day-to-day company life. It would mean travel, pressure, media, politics. It would be a whole new world." Jerome thought about it. He looked out the window of the office, the same office he had once walked past every night with a mop in his hand, and realized something. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a mission he accepted. In the months that followed, Jerome helped launch talent discovery programs in 5 major cities. He spoke at universities and tech conferences, not with flashy speeches, but with quiet power. He always ended with the same line: "Sometimes the person you're overlooking is the one who can save you, but they'll only speak if you bother to listen." Back at the company headquarters, Jerome's old mop cart was placed in a glass case in the lobby, with a plaque that read, "To the man who reminded us what potential really looks like." And though he now traveled the world and met with leaders and innovators, Jerome always made sure one thing remained true: his office door, wherever it was, stayed open. For the quiet ones, the overlooked ones. The next Jerome. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard.